Luke 17, verse 6, where Jesus said, "If ye had faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye might say unto this sycamine tree, Be thou plucked up by the root, be thou planted in the sea, and it should obey you." Funny, but most people think this is a teaching on faith. It has nothing to do with faith. This is a verse about bitterness and unforgiveness. In fact, in chapter 17, verse 1, Jesus said, "It is impossible, but that offenses will come." This whole text is about offenses. The word offense, by the way, is the Greek word scandalos. It's something that makes you trip. Something that makes you trip. What is an offense? People are offended because of what someone does, or they're offended by what someone does not do. Think about it. The times you've been offended, what made you trip over somebody's reputation, what made you stumble or get offended, was either because of what somebody did and it just shocked you, or what they didn't do and it hurt you. People get offended because of what people do or what they don't do. And Jesus said in life it's impossible that offenses are going to come. That's just part of life. And when you get to verse 3, it's interesting. Jesus says, "Take heed to yourself." The Greek literally says, "Get a grip on yourself." That's funny to me because when you're offended, you usually want to get a grip on somebody else. But you can't always change the other person, but you can change yourself. So Jesus says, hey, get your eyes off of your offender. Get your eyes on yourself. Get a grip on yourself. And Jesus tells them to forgive. And the disciples say, "Oh, it's so hard to forgive. Lord, increase our faith." And that's when Jesus says, if you have great faith as a grain of mustard seed, you can speak to this sycamine. Well, mustard seed was small. Tiny, 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 tiny. You see, most people say, "Well, I could forgive if I just had more faith. Well, I could forgive if I had faith like you." It's almost like Jesus said to the disciples, "What do you mean increase our faith? Come on, come on, come on. Don't talk like that. That's an excuse. All you need is faith the size of a grain of mustard seed." Guys, you don't need a lot of faith to forgive. Quit talking about increase my faith. All you need is the very smallest little minuscule amount of faith, faith the size of a grain of mustard seed. Anybody can forgive. All you need is the tiniest amount of faith. All it takes is a small amount of faith to say to this sycamine tree, "Be plucked up by the roots and be cast into the sea." Now, I'm going to take just a few moments today because I want you to understand the sycamine tree. Jesus was comparing bitterness and unforgiveness to the sycamine tree. The sycamine tree. If you have your Bible, you ought to underline that in your Bible. Now, why didn't he say palm tree? Why didn't he say cactus? Cactus would seem to be a pretty good picture of bitterness and unforgiveness. Why didn't he say an oak tree or a palm tree or a fir tree? Why did Jesus say speak to this sycamine tree? Was that accidental? Or was there a reason Jesus used the sycamine tree as an example of bitterness and unforgiveness? There is a reason. 4 reasons why Jesus used the sycamine tree, and I want you to write it down. Number 1, the sycamine tree had the deepest root structure of all trees in the Middle East. And by using the word sycamine tree, Jesus is telling us that when people have a root of bitterness, it has very, 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 very deep roots. In fact, sometimes the roots of bitterness are so deep, they pass from one generation all the way to the next generation. There are people today offended with entire people groups that never did anything to them personally, but did something to their ancestors. That shows how deep are the roots of bitterness. They're like the sycamine tree. The roots are deep, 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 and the roots are very complex. But that's not all. Listen to this. The sycamine wood, now this is really something, was so durable, it was the preferred wood for building caskets. The preferred wood for building caskets. This is casket material. This is funeral material. Which tells me if you've got unforgiveness working in your life, it has the ability to put you 6 feet under. It will kill your life spiritually. It will take your joy. It will take your relationships. Bitterness and unforgiveness. Are you listening to me, friends? It is casket material. So number one, the sycamine tree had a deep, complex root structure. Number two, it was the preferred wood for building caskets. Number three, are you ready? The fruit of the sycamine tree was the most bitter of all fruit. The most bitter of all fruit. But it looked very much like the fruit of the fig tree. And sometimes people would think they were taking of the fig and didn't realize they were taking a bite of the sycamine. And when they would taste it, the taste of it was so bitter. And there's something else. Poor people usually couldn't afford figs. So the poor people ate sycamine fruit. The poor. They ate the most bitter fruit of all. And I think this is important because it tells us that when people are bitter and unforgiving, it makes them poor in so many ways of their life. Poor in their relationships, poor in their souls. So now, number one, we find the sycamine tree had the deepest, most complex root structures of all trees in the Middle East. Number two, the sycamine wood was the preferred wood for building caskets. Number three, it was the fruit eaten by poor people, and it was bitter, bitter to taste. And number four, are you ready for this? The sycamine tree was not naturally pollinated. The only way it could be pollinated, now listen careful, was when a wasp stuck its stinger in the fruit. And when a wasp would stick its stinger into the fruit, the sting of the wasp is what pollinated the tree. Well, think about it. Why are most people bitter? If you listen to their language, they say, you know what, I've been stung by that relationship once. I'm not going to be stung again. The wasp got to them, left its stinger in their soul. It's pollinated, and now they're eating bitter fruit that has the ability to put them 6 feet under spiritually. And if they don't deal with it, this root will become so deep and so complex, they'll pass it to their kids, they'll pass it to their grandkids, they'll pass it to their friends, because this root structure is deep and complex. Now you know why Jesus likened offense, bitterness, unforgiveness to the sycamine tree exactly, and not to some other tree. And I want to tell you, friend, if you've got any bitterness or unforgiveness or offense working in you, your temptation is to say, well, I have a reason to feel this way. But Jesus said in Luke 17:3, get a grip on yourself. Sitting there and being bitter, eating that bitter fruit, isn't going to change the other people. It's just going to make you more bitter. It's going to put you 6 feet under. It's going to create a problem in your soul so deep and complex, a counselor won't be able to help you get out. You've just got to make a decision to get a grip on yourself. And if you're one of those people who say, well, I just don't have enough faith to do that, well, I just have to remind you, Jesus said all it takes is faith the size of a grain of a mustard seed. All you have to do is make a decision. You've got enough faith. You just got to make a decision.